Yo, welcome to the Chln Podcast, brought to you by A-Rated Media. Here's a fun fact. This is my network. And if you don't like cursing, turn the motherfucking station.
Well, let me just start by saying, you and I have had many conversations about your personal evolution and how you're working through that. And I think the first thing that we touched on was religion and spirituality, which are two very, very different things. And I think there's a lot of confusion centered around religion because most people are brought up with an ideology, whereas if their parents are Catholic or Jewish or whatever, that becomes their truth. Mm-hmm. But then you get to a point in your own evolution where you have to ask yourself, well, is the truth of my parents really working for me? And you have to step outside of that box,
right,
and really get comfortable with who you are. Mm-hmm. And I see a lot of that happening now. So mainly with young people, which makes me very excited.
So would you agree that this is an age of, I guess you would say, critical mass right now, where like an age of ascension, where people are, I guess the natural evolutionary order is happening, I guess, where people are awakening at the same time? Is that kind of what's going on right now? As I don't want to say we're straying away from doctrine. If anything, we're living the doctrine out more than ever, I guess, if you're finding yourself, I assume.
I do see that. And I think that all of us that understand the whole metaphysics of spirituality and questioning our own truths about who we are, this is where we're supposed to be. In other words, the universe is saying you need to get out of the box and figure out what works for you. And I do see this manifesting. I wish it was manifesting more, but one thing I'm really happy about is seeing that it's happening earlier for younger people and not waiting until they get, further along in age, which that's okay too, but I'm glad that I'm seeing this more so in young people question their spirituality and what life means to them, like you.
Mm-hmm. I agree. And once again, so I guess dealing with time, I mean, I'm going to go back to this, the critical mass era thing. Do you feel that it's all just a part of timing? Because if time is just a man construct, and time really does not exist, so wouldn't this just be a necessary part of the evolution of people? So where you say people are awakening up younger and younger nowadays, is this just the way it's supposed to be in the timing of it all? I guess we'd say in our realm, we call it time. That's what's going on. It's just a part of like necessary ascension.
I do. I do. Well, I like to say people are becoming awake. And there is a social evolution that's happening now. A lot of people are paying attention. Some people are not. But I feel like the ones that are paying attention, they're really asking hard questions about who they are, why they're here. And then you have people that are so deeply ingrained into their religion that it's almost impossible for them to step outside of the box. And not everyone is going to get this in this lifetime.
Correct.
But for the ones that do, for the ones that really embrace their spirituality and really look at their own evolution, they become the teachers for this millennium. And that's kind of what the social consciousness is kind of teaching on a universal level.
I got you. That makes sense to me. I think for a lot of people out there who are afraid to explore, but it just seems to me that whenever it's kind of spirituality is kind of mysticized, that's when it becomes fictional to a lot of people. So when it's like made up to be trying to think like Disney movies will make it like magic and all these different things like that, I think that's what kind of scares people. So I think religion gives them a place of comfort. So it's a disciplinary action, and it gives them a place of comfort because they know they've seen what people have supposedly gotten out of it, I guess, and that's what they're taught, so they stay with it. But at the same time, when you tell them to venture out, it's always seems like the outside of religion realm is like fantasy and all this, this good stuff. So what would you say to I guess to I don't want to say younger people, because like I said, I don't believe in the time thing, but what would you say to people in general who are afraid to step outside of the religious discipline box or whatever to tap into their spirituality, that are afraid that it's just like, it's ghouls and goblins and stuff like that?
Taboo.
That's the word I'm looking for. Taboo.
Well, you have to go back to the conditioning of every individual. I mean, we're all conditioned. Let me put it this way. When a woman is pregnant, that child is being conditioned from the womb. So whatever the mother's ideologies and beliefs are, like I said before, that becomes a truth for the child. And there is a certain level of mysticism centered around the unknown, because I can see why people don't venture out into the unknown, because it's scary, and then once they take on something new, then it's like everything they've been taught, it's like shattering the glass above your head, so to speak. And then they become afraid to venture out. And a lot of people don't really understand that, and I'm going to go here with this. A lot of people don't understand that Jesus taught metaphysics.
Hold up. Let's stop right there. Run that back. She said what? You said, okay, so you said Jesus practiced metaphysics. You know you're going to have to explain to all the millions of listeners right now what you meant by that.
Well, Jesus taught different things to different people. Okay. So he taught the good news.
The gospel.
Which represented the gospel, the new Christianity. But he also taught to Mary Magdalene, Thomas, and Judas Iscariot. He taught them about reincarnation.
Talking about the doubting Thomas? Him?
Yes.
Okay.
And the reason why he did that is because history has shown that that Judas was the one that betrayed him, when in reality that's not really true. Mm-hmm. And then women did not have a political platform during the time of Jesus, and Thomas doubted everything. Mm-hmm. You see, so he taught each one of them reincarnation, about what it meant. And because he knew that Thomas was going to struggle with it. Mm-hmm. No one was going to believe Judas because they saw him as a traitor. And no one was going to believe Mary because she did not, being a woman, she didn't have a political platform to stand on. But he did teach them reincarnation. And the other thing, too, is about Judas, is that Judas and Jesus were best friends growing up as children. Jesus came from a poor family. Judas came from a somewhat wealthy family. And Judas knew everything about Jesus, even when they were very young children. And even when Jesus was 10 years old, Judas and Jesus was playing in a courtyard on top of one of the houses, and Jesus pushed another child off of the top of his house. He fell to the courtyard and he died. And Jesus was 10 years old. But by the time this happened, people that were in the courtyard that saw this, they started screaming and yelling, "Oh my God, Jesus has killed a child, Jesus killed a child." But then he went and brought this child back to life. So Judas was aware of what Jesus was capable of doing. Okay. And so when Judas got pinned with this whole misconception that he was a traitor, what most people don't realize is that Jesus asked him to do what he did. And the one thing that Judas didn't understand, because he knew what Jesus was capable of doing, he thought that Jesus would just do something miraculous to prevent his death from occurring. But what Judas failed to understand is that the death was the miracle.
Message.
And so Jesus taught Judas a lot about metaphysics and mysticism. And not only that, Jesus's mother, Mary, she also belonged to a cult called the Essenes, and they practice mysticism.
Okay.
So a lot of things that Jesus knew as a child came straight from his family, from his mother's side of the family, because that's what they were, a Jewish cult, and they believed in mysticism and taught that.
So Mary was deep in the metaphysics.
Yes.
Gotcha, which explains a lot. So, I mean, let's say, okay, so Jesus, I mean, that's the, let's just speak practical. That's the main guy. That's Western civilization. That's the main guy when it comes to the spiritual, religious, metaphysical world. Why is he the last? Why? I mean, I know you have the, Islamic sect, and you have that with Muhammad, and so why this contention between the big religious groups, the whole 9 yards? Why, if spirituality is out there, and it sounds like there's truth in these religions and in the doctrines, then why aren't they one? What's separating these spiritual texts? I'm confused on that.
Well, a lot of the Eastern texts, Jainism and some of the Jewish cults, the majority of the religious doctrine that are Eastern, a lot of them believe and teach reincarnation. It's only here in the West that it is shunned, because in the early 1500s, the fundamentalists in Europe were very despondent with the way religion was going, mainly when Martin Luther, posted his declaration on the church doors. A lot of people fled Europe, and they came to this country, to the West, and they started creating their own religion.
This was like the new California.
Yes.
Before California. Gotcha. Okay. I'm following.
So they came here and they brought their own religion, and they made it what they wanted it to be. Not saying that they were following the correct dogma, but it's like, we're going to go create our own religion. And so in creating their own religion, a lot of texts, a lot of history was not included. Right. And not only that, the Emperor Constantine in 535, I believe, I could be off by a few years, he brought all of the religious scholars together in Nice, France, and every religious text that existed at that time was discussed, because at this point they were in the process of creating the Holy Bible. Okay, and so after going through all of these texts, there were 27 books that were not included in what we know as the Holy Bible. Wow. And a lot of those 27 texts talks about the teachings of reincarnation and mysticism. And the reason why they did that, and this is very typical of the church, is that the religion is a control mechanism.
Correct.
So even back during this time period, it was like, okay, if we include these 27 books into what we now know as the Bible, it's like it's just a matter of time before people are going to learn how to read. It's just a matter of time before people can afford a Bible.
Correct.
And they're going to look in here and read about what reincarnation really means. And that was very threatening to them, because if it was me, and I lived, and I could have lived during that time frame, but if it was me and I know how to read and I pick up this book, this holy text, and read what reincarnation is about, and I'm a slave or a servant or something like that, kill me. You see, kill me, because I know I'm coming back.
Right, exactly.
You understand? And this is not the kind of knowledge that
Gotcha.
they wanted out in society. So these 27 books were not included. Matter of fact, the 27 books, they became the Gnostic texts.
Okay.
These are the texts
This
that
is where the Gnostics, the
in
Apocrypha, and all that.
That's right, in Egypt, and the jars and that type
Interesting.
of thing.
So you said Constantinople or I'm sorry, Constantine and his empire, which was Constantinople. But you're saying that he was part of the group or the crew that didn't want these documents to get out, the other documents, or so I'm confused. So the battle, the history comes back. The battle of the Milvian Bridge, where he had the great dream, that they say he had a dream. And if they won the war, he would put the cross on the flag, and then they won the war, so he put the cross on the flag. I guess thus beginning the popularism of the cross. I guess assume. So what was that whole deal about? The dream that he had.
You're talking about Constantine.
Constantine, yep.
Well, Constantine was in battle. And he said when he was on the battlefield that he got a vision of a cross.
Right.
That changed his whole ideology and how he believed, because he was a Roman.
Right.
You know, and so when he said he had this vision, it changed him, you know, into Christianity, his thought processes into Christianity, and this is how this whole concept started. And so once he went into Christianity, then he started working with the other scholars and writers of that day to bring all of this about.
Gotcha. So everything just kind of spread west.
Right, but I mean, way before Constantine, there were quite a few religious sects that practiced what Jesus taught.
Okay.
You know, they were well hidden, you know, but a lot of this was going on. It was just kept very quiet.
Do you know of any, like, since we're back in that, I feel like we're in that time and space, I guess, but do you know of any other practices or group practices, or I don't want to say cult, but religion, or, you know, anything like that maybe the listeners may not know of? Like, did they have any titles? Because I know you said a lot of it came from Eastern religions, but what was going on in that area, in Europe, I guess I would say, or in Mesopotamia?
Well, there was Buddhism and Jainism, and unfortunately I don't have all the isms in front of me, but a lot of them were, I like to call them, like we have Native Americans here, but I like to call them European natives, you know, like within the India and places like that, you know. So,
Gotcha.
and then there was the Hasidic Jews.
Okay.
The ones that wear the little curls,
Yeah.
black hats with the curls, Hasidic Jews. They also
Right, yarmulke.
with the yarmulke, they also practice reincarnation.
Okay, so that's where that comes from. Interesting. It's very interesting. So it sounds like with religion there was a protection of power. It seems like with any kind of religion. I don't want to just say Christianity, but it seems like most religions, or I don't want to say most because I'm not in a place to say that, but a lot of religions are based off a place of power. I guess Christianity would definitely be based off a place of power. And it sounds like obviously there's truth to the Bible. That's why when you read it, you feel something from it. However, there are, I guess, manipulated texts, I guess I would say, in it. Will we say that, or is that a good term?
I believe that.
Manipulated text.
Like when you look at religious texts, whether it's the Quran or the Bible, they are they're not so much books of history, but they're books of events. That's how I interpret it. Right.
Right. And I see, my biggest thing is with books is that a book is inscribed by man. So my thing is that if it goes back to like kindergarten, when you sit in a circle and you start off with a quick story, like a 5-word story, and then you pass it, and when it comes all the way around, it's a different story. So my thing with the books is I always worried about the text at this point in time. So if it passed through so many hands and so many times, we have a King James version and all these different versions of the Bible. And I always said the biggest thing that stood out to me was just the difference in worship from, I always say, the black churches to the white churches. And there's completely two different forms of worship, but it's the same book, but they're taking different things out. And that always kind of threw me for a loop. That was gave me bad energy, gave me bad vibes, seeing that. And that's what actually made me observe and look outside the box to find more. And it's kind of amazing how people are still controlled in that, I guess, where if I feel like if they bounced around two different churches, which it seems like churches are very taboo about that too. So most churches want you to come to their church. However, what about the other churches? And then they say, we can visit, but they really want you to be at their church. So it's almost like they don't want the ideals of their church to spread to another church. So if they're not unified, but they have a secret, that always confused me. There was a lack of cohesion with all the churches. But it's like you said, if this was the Wild West of religion back in the day, then you had to make whatever was comfortable for you. I guess we all have different religions and dogmas and disciplines that we follow, whether it be yoga, coffee, running, trying to think all things we can become addicted to, but I guess set us free mentally. And that's what it sounds like. But when it comes to spiritualism, though, it sounds like a personal journey between you, yourself, and infinite intelligence, the higher being, energy, vibration. So I guess what I would want the listeners to understand is that it's completely separate from religion. So a lot of people like to say, when you're on your spiritual discovery, or when you're finding self, that in itself is a religion. So everybody wants to be, I guess, in a sort of box. So you have atheists that say, I'm an atheist, right? So I'm in this atheist box, which is technically religion. If you're spiritual and you can't be labeled, then now you're a spiritualist and you have to be in spiritualism. But it's just erasing the box, and I guess the oneness of all creation is really what you're seeking. But I guess that comes on your own personal journey, is what it sounds like. So I guess where I'm going to transition to is, let's talk about where we're going, right? So we're here now. People are waking. Communication is open. I can talk to a kid in Japan or China and talk to him instantly about his spiritual beliefs and, Antarctica. I don't know if they have Wi-Fi up there, but we can call them. We can go to these different places. And it seems like it's all becoming one, but there's still a state of confusion. So it seems like we're in a state of flux right now where people are walking around. And it's like, hey, you're a new neighbor, but I don't really know what to say to you yet. And so what's going to connect, or what do you feel is going to connect these souls and get them to communicate on a higher plane, I guess I would say?
Well, I think that it's all about evolving, because you have the 3D, 4D, and 5D concepts, and all people are born into a 3D concept, which means that they're dealing with themselves from a physical standpoint. I also feel that people don't really look at themselves and truly understand that their physical self is just a vehicle.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Exactly.
And they're not really in depth with their soul. that represents their true identity. So when you're dwelling in a 3D concept, you're really dealing with your physical self.
Right.
You're not really dealing with your true identity. And I think when you start questioning yourself and your identity, and you come to the understanding that this physical body that I'm walking around in is not really me, and when you do that, it keeps you so ingrained and close to the Earth's curriculum. Mm-hmm. It's almost like you're living in your lower self.
Correct.
And but when you start identifying with yourself from a spiritual concept and start really looking at your soul as being your true identity, then I think once you embrace that concept, I mean truly embrace it, then that helps you move from a lower state into a higher state.
I agree. I was going to say that I would say my personal experiences that I guess I would say the key is empathy. And the reason I say empathy is that if you can, just starting on this plane, so if you can put yourself in another individual's, I guess, body, see out their eyes, feel what they feel when you're speaking to them, just far as just empathy right there, I think that's a level of spiritual, I guess, clairvoyance you'd say, or psychic ability, or using your intuition that we don't tap into more. So if you can look at empathy and say, all right, look at my body, and then have empathy for yourself and look at yourself from an outside perspective, I think that is the key to allowing you to see more. And this is why I think so many people are, I guess, angry and lost and confused in this time space, is that they can't look outside of their body at their self. So they're so in their body that it's like my universe has to survive amongst these universes, and I can't become obsolete, because it kind of goes back to what you were saying earlier. I guess it would be the fear of true death, or like a infinite death, I guess it would be. That's the fear that they have. And if they can see the outside, I always tell people one good way to look at it, if you really just want to see that there's more out there, right, is I say on a highway. So if we're all cells, the Milky Way is a body. Well, let's start with us, right? So and correct me if I'm wrong here, I'm gonna try to give this analogy a little bit better, but all right, light is molecules moving at a very, very fast pace, correct? Extremely fast pace, very, very high frequency. Solid is moving at a slower frequency, correct? So our bodies are solid bodies. So our bodies are lower frequencies, and we have light in us, which is a higher frequency. So that in itself is a battle. I always say the battle, the supposed good and evil battle. That's the battle there. That's what we're trying to figure out. So if that's the case, and this is, now that we understand that, this is obviously a vehicle, like you said before, let's talk about vehicles. So Milky Way is a body, right? Yeah, and you know, a human body has cells. White blood cells are the good ones, right? They group together, they heal, they all come together and say, hey, let's do this good thing, right? That's what white blood cells do. Then you have bad cells. You have like cancer cells, and you know, they do their own thing. And I was having a conversation yesterday, is that when they do their own thing, somebody asked, well, what happens when cancer cells, when they do grow, or whatever they call it, masticize, I don't know the word. I said, well, the body does whatever it has to do, sends whatever reinforcements it can to eradicate those cells. Even if it can, it does whatever it has to eradicate those cells, because it doesn't want those cells going. It's unnatural to the rest of the flow. So they say, okay, we understand that. So if the Milky Way is a body, right? And then we have different planets. We have stars, planets. These stars and planets are like organs and like, you know, important pieces of your giant body. So if it comes down to Earth, right? And Earth is like one organ. Well, it's the organ with cells in it. So you say, well, who are we? So our job, I always say, if you really want to break it down, our job is to be really good white blood cells, right? So if we get with, let's say light blood cells, all right? So we'll kill the color thing. So as we get together and we group together, we do good things. And it's like amazing when you do good things come to you, right? Then good people come to you. But that's how cells work, right? So if you're on the highway, I asked somebody, I said, well, when you're on a highway in traffic and you're just looking down the road and cars are going down, if you looked at it from above, what does it look like in terms of human body? And they always say a bloodstream. I said, exactly. So if we're a bunch of cells moving through, we're on a mission, it's because we're working. We have things to do on this organ or this planet, this living organism, to do for the bigger picture. And if you can understand that, then you can start seeing your place in time and saying, all right, so I do have a purpose here to do this, whatever it is. And it always seems like everybody always comes back to it, whether it's religion, sports, or anything, but it's like a quest for love. So if we know that's inside of us, the love, the light, happiness. Those are the things that we seek, that we know that those are the operating mechanisms to complete our lives. And I think that question right there is what allows you to find what you're supposed to do in this time and space. So, I mean, that's just what I feel. So I'll allow you to feel free to comment on that in your opinion. I know it was a long-winded metaphor or whatever, but yeah, that's kind of how I see it.
Well, I think a lot of people, they don't look at themselves as being a source of energy. Okay, so everything in the universe is connected.
Right, I agree.
The stars, the planets, the Milky Ways, everything is one source of energy. And I think what is confusing for a lot of people is when you take this energy and you place it into a physical form, a host. Your body is called a host. You put limitations on yourself. Mm-hmm. And that takes you back to that 3D concept, mm-hmm. because that's how you're looking at yourself. You may go stand in the mirror. Matter of fact, when I do workshops, I put mirrors under people's chairs, mm-hmm. and I have everybody pull out their mirrors, and I say, tell me what you see.
Right.
And they say, oh, I see me. I see this. I see that. But what does that mean? What does that mean when you say, I see me?
That's a good question.
And they're just like, well, they see their body. They're not looking beyond that. Mm-hmm. And I think when people finally come to the understanding that this body is not who they are.
Correct.
It's just a host.
Mm-hmm.
And when they start looking at themselves as being a source of energy, because your soul is a source of energy, then you can remove the limitations.
Correct.
And live a much greater life, because when you look at your physical self in terms of success and failure, when people, I think that nobody wants to fail. At whatever they're doing.
Right. It's connected to pain and fear and negativity.
But the thing about it is, when you look at yourself from a spiritual standpoint and realize that your soul is your true identity, then you will understand that you can't fail. Mm-hmm. That's not even an option.
It's impossible to fail.
It's totally impossible, because when you're looking at yourself from a spiritual standpoint and understanding that your soul is who you truly are, you have removed those limitations for failure.
Correct.
If that makes any sense.
Yeah, because it means that everything is necessary. It's everything rising to the forefront for you to accomplish it in this space and time. But I guess I wouldn't want to. We can talk about that on in probably later episodes where we're talking about time and space, and I think that'll help people connect with past lives and the whole 9 yards to make that more sense. Because a lot of limits that we have right now are limited by science, right? So science, a lot of people don't want to agree or accept the fact that science is spiritual. Spirit is science, and they separate the two. And I think that's a big issue right now. They know, when I say they, I don't even know who they is, people making a lot of money off it, but they know about this. That's why there's a new craze or new hype of holistic medicine again. Like, it's never been around before, but now it's making a new kind of rise. And then you have the rise of the vegan movement and the rise of organic food that's now labeled on foods now. So people are going back to natural medicine. They're still figuring out how to profit off it. This big thing, but people are going back to natural medicine. And I say that it's, I read something somewhere about light bodies, and I don't want to leave them too much once again, but light workers. So this is the point where it's the maximum separation of man and spirit. So it's the maximum point of separation for us to see what we can do on our own. Now it's the effects reverse. So we're going through an age of ascension now. So now in that stage of ascension, we're actually reconnecting with our higher source. And that's what's allowing us to, going back to this light, it's allowing the atoms and molecules in us to speed up. And we're actually becoming light now. And I believe that's what's happening. So as we go back into, oops, sorry about that. As we, that's a galaxy. You hear that ringer, guys?
Sorry about that.
No, it's okay. It's a galaxy. It's no pun intended. But but as we go to that, I do feel that's what's going on, is that people in this awakening period, they are becoming lighter, are being aware, And we're going to go back to this holistic thing, but science and the spirit realm have to merge. Doctors have to acknowledge spiritualism and vice versa. And that's the way, because I was a history major, and I always say I have a degree in reading about 99% of lies and trying to figure out why they lied about it. And when you're looking at that, we never talked about cancer deaths, like mass cancer deaths. You had Black Plague, you had cholera and polio and like those kind of things, malaria, but you didn't have cancer. And now this mass cancer thing, people act like it's normal, and it's actually marketed. So it's kind of strange that you have these, these marketed sales of that are manipulating in the whole 9 yards, and we want that here, which is kind of odd the way that is. But there are ways to, I don't have the cure, but there are ways to eradicate these cancers as a word, if you look at the definition, by just being holistic and getting connected to your spiritual self, because cells are made to heal, rejuvenate, and like you say, reincarnate. Right.
It makes sense. But when you think about cancer and other diseases, when you think about someone being ill and succumbing to a particular disease, people don't realize that souls agree to this. There are no mistakes, no accidents, and no coincidences, and everything happens for a reason. And I remember, I don't know, maybe 20-some years ago, I lived in this neighborhood, and there was a young teenage boy who was a full paraplegic. And I would see, and my kids were young, and they'd be out playing, but I would see him, controlling his wheelchair. And I would feel so sorry for him. And I'm like, oh my God, he's so young. He's got to be about 13, 14 years old. But then I realized that, he had to agree to this, for whatever reason. He could, then I thought it could be a number of things. He could be paying off a karmic debt, or this could be an act of retribution against a parent, or he could be accelerating his soul growth.
Now, to help the listeners, once again, when you say he agreed to this, let's clear it up. So when exactly did he agree to this? Not at the age of 13.
No, he would have agreed to this in his life planning. All illness is karmic related. And so I'm in the book that I'm writing right now, and I've been communicating with my family on the other side about some of the things that they have had to endure in their past lives, and even in their current lives, even though they have all crossed over now. But I've been in constant contact with them, trying to understand what they agree to, their behavior patterns, and how all of this shapes my life.
Gotcha. So what's the name of that book that you're writing?
Solely Me.
Solely Me. I like that. So I feel like we should talk more about this book come the next episode. Definitely, we need to talk more about this book and past lives, because I believe that we talked a lot today about time, which you heard me disagree with time a lot, but then we also repeated that word a lot. So I think we should talk a lot more about time to help us understand this thing, because that, if you take what I learned, this is history. When you take the chronological aspect out of time, it frees up a lot of understanding for you. So you can look back and look forward and present, and it clears it up. But once you get off that scale, it seems free. And I know Regina will have a lot to talk about that subject as well. So,
well, let me just tell you one thing. Time is an illusion, and I'll leave it at that.
That's deep. We might have to go, guys. We're going to let you let that marinate, and we're going to go. Thank you again.
All right.